Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is our third video in a series intended to help B2B professionals better document their on-paper go-to-market strategies when selling that which is their heart's desire to restaurants. In today's video, we're going to focus on step 1 in our 5-step go-to-market exercise, which is to speak the market. We're going to spend a good amount of time picking apart semantics with the goal of aligning how we talk about the restaurant industry. I'll introduce you to the 7 most common attributes I hear people use when talking about restaurants, and we'll cover what I believe to be the most standardized and scalable linguistic approach. Whether you consider yourself an industry expert or whether this is the first time you've sold to restaurants, I hope you stick around. You just might learn a thing or two. Or 7. The goal is 7. Let's go. At a previous company I worked for, I remember there was a growth period where there were several new CEOs in what seemed like rapid succession. These CEOs each brought in incredibly seasoned executives from companies like Oracle and SAP, all with impressive track records that spoke for themselves. At the same time, we were constantly hiring sales reps, and while we had previously always tried to hire AEs who had sold SaaS to restaurants before, basically ones that came with a Rolodex, that simply wasn't scalable. As a result, we had a constant influx of employees at all levels of the organization who didn't know or understand the complexities of the industry, and we had very little training and preparation on how to ramp them quickly. What set in was an absolutely palpable level of what I can only best describe as industry training fatigue. Yes, we got better at this over time, but I'm still secretly hoping that this video starts an industry-wide conversation on how we can all likely benefit by committing to talk about the same thing the same way. Lastly, in addition to today's video, we've created a downloadable dictionary of sorts where we've spelled out everything we'll cover today, which is essentially what we've found to be the most effective after 15 years on the subject. It's a concise set of attributes intended to be shared with colleagues and perhaps even folded into training materials, sales handbooks, or internal wikis. Or you could just send them a link to this video. Up first, I want to talk about restaurants in terms of their firmographic attributes. When you look at restaurants as a business, I believe there are 6 things that you could learn about that business that could ultimately affect if, when, and how you choose to prospect them. There are 2 quick things to note in terms of why we've chosen these 6 specific firmographic attributes and not others. Number 1, these are all common attributes we've encountered when speaking with companies who target the restaurant industry. Number 2, they're all things that can be sussed out without ever having to pick up the phone, though it would take patience and a lot of elbow grease to do this one at a time. But technically, all 6 of these attributes can be validated at scale with the right data partner. Attribute number 1, unit count. Ask 4 people to define what a restaurant is, and you'll get 4 very different answers. I actually used to do this during new employee onboarding, and it was always pretty hysterical. But laughing aside, it's important that we have a shared definition of what does and does not count as a unit, as this often drives what team members' territory holds quota for it. Here's our definition. A restaurant unit is defined as a brick-and-mortar establishment where food or beverages are sold to customers. Now, it's not perfect, but it absolutely helps us align on what we can count and gives us a rule of thumb to ensure everyone is approaching multi-unit concept counts similarly. Using this definition as an example, we'd never include anything like food trucks or kiosks or farmers market locations because they're not brick and mortar. We also wouldn't count a sushi stand inside a grocery store or a pizza oven run by a convenience store employee for the same reason. There are a few places where things can get slippery. What if a location is seasonal? Or what if some restaurants are listed as coming soon? Or what if one location has 4 restaurants inside it, like virtual concepts or ghost kitchens, which are trending hard? These are all valid questions. My personal take on when and if a unit is counted is ultimately decided by what can be easily verified at scale straight from a restaurant's website. Once companies have a uniform approach to counting restaurants, it's really common to see a second sub-attribute emerge in the unit count category, which we'll call segment. Segment means you take a group of unit counts, let's say between 10 and 20 units, and you group them together and give them a name. This is really helpful when you want to talk about relative unit counts, not just talk about 11-unit deals. Now, exactly where you make the distinction between one segment and the next will vary from company to company, but there seem to always be four, so I feel like they're worth mentioning here. First, there's independents, typically abbreviated IND. The most common cut here I've seen is between 1 and 5 units. This segment gives new reps transactional sales with a few multi-units to chip away at their quota. Perfect for new hires. Next are SMB businesses, usually between 6 and 20 units. Then, mid-market deals. You'll see MM or MID, starting at 21 units and with the high-end cutoff anywhere between 100 or 150 units. And lastly, enterprise deals or ENT deals, which is everything 101 or 151 plus. What unit counts you use to separate these segments is less important than understanding why segmenting the market like this is important. The primary reason for carving out industry segment is to match the hypothesized complexity of winning a longer sales cycle deal to more senior sales reps. Having these distinctions also means you can quickly group together lookalike deals by relative unit count. After unit count and market segment, the next attribute to isolate is primary offering. Basically, what is the restaurant known for and what are they selling? There's a lot of ways to do this, so I use the following outline to force me to organize my thoughts. Do I recognize the type of establishment? Is it a steakhouse or cafe or fast food? Is there an identifiable cuisine? Italian, Tex-Mex, Japanese? What type of food are they offering? Tacos, hot dogs, bubble tea, or pretzels? And is there a unique style of food preparation? Vegetarian, kosher, hot pot, fondue. There are a lot of possible outcomes to consume here. By our latest count, well over 300. But if you can isolate these keywords, you can subsequently segment industry data based on what they offer. Let me give you an example. Maybe you want to find businesses that sell pizza so you can target them with a POS designed for that cuisine. Or bucket out units with fried chicken on the menu as prime targets for your new buffalo sauce. Once you've identified a restaurant's second attribute, which is primary offering, the next logical step is to infer their service type, which is our attribute number 3. Styles of service have come a long way in the past 30 years, with offshoots like fine casual popping up recently. And while we as consumers may be able to perceive whether a place would be considered fine dining or casual dining, our opinions on cost or ambiance can be really subjective. While modern variations often seek to push the boundaries, restaurant service types can be grouped rather neatly into the following 3 most common categories. Number 1, full service or FSR. Number 2, limited service or LSR. And number 3, buffets and cafeterias. Now, from a technical perspective, these definitions align with NAICS, which is the North American Industry Classification System, which means they align with a variety of standard industry assessments in terms of which sectors are growing or shrinking, which can be pretty handy. Now, sometimes adopting these 3 buckets across teams can be really hard, especially for anyone who has worked in the industry long enough to know that this system is, by design, reductive. But the biggest thing to emphasize here is that it scales. You can run algorithms based on offering at scale and get really, really close in terms of inferring a restaurant's service style, which is huge. For everything beyond FSR and LSR, you can use subsequent attributes like price range, which is also scalable, to pick out where they may be on the FSR or LSR spectrum. I also have a trick, if it helps, which is a sort of gates of truth exercise. It basically just forces me to quiet my bias using 2 simple questions. Number 1, when was the food prepared or protein cooked? Before I ordered it or after I ordered it? And number 2, when was payment tendered? Was it before I consumed my food or after? Before, that is, food prepared before I ordered it and payment tendered before I ate my food, trends towards LSR. After trends towards FSR. Think about Chipotle. While they technically prepare my burrito in front of me, the chicken and beef were already ready. Protein before, I pay before I eat it, LSR. Chili's, my alma mater, cooks the burger after I order it, and I pay when I've finished my meal, FSR. What about Hopdoddy? Well, anyone who knows that brand knows that what they are doing is weird. I love it, but it is weird. And it's LSR because fast casual and fine casual and snack and non-alcoholic beverage bars are all considered LSR. Oh, and one last thing since we're on the subject of weird. Tons of places nowadays that don't look or feel or act like traditional restaurants have food combined with some sort of experience, and therefore will inevitably attract your attention. We basically lump all of these together in a group we call eatertainment. Internally, you may have heard them referred to as adjacent or tangential markets. 2 things on the eatertainment subject. Number 1, there's a list on screen with some examples which you'll also find in the downloadable asset, or you can just pause here and read them. Number 2, there are way less of these than you think. There's Topgolf, and then there's a bunch of other smaller ones. After service type, we move on to our 4th attribute, which is ownership. This attribute is a bit of a mess. Really important, but a bit of a mess. The simplest way to frame the ownership conversation is by thinking, is what I'm looking at part of something bigger? We use the words concepts and companies, where concepts are shared menus and restaurant design and service style and offering to group together brands into meaningful multi-unit profiles. Companies is how we refer to decision-making entities that sometimes sit on top of these concepts and control buying decisions. But sometimes concepts just exist on their own, not underneath a parent company. And sometimes companies exist that are just a collection of a bunch of single-unit restaurants, not multi-unit concepts. And then there are investment groups that seem to sit even more on top that don't mandate purchasing decisions across brands. Ownership is complex, and unfortunately, it's non-uniform across the industry. Almost every LSR with over 1,000 units has franchisees, which is another absolute frustration when selling to restaurants. What you need to know is this. Most organizations route multi-unit restaurants based on the overall potential of the deal, so sometimes simply knowing that it's part of something bigger is enough to route it correctly and keep moving. Here's a quick example to make sure we're on the same page before we move on. Maggiano's Little Italy, which has 54 units at the time this was recorded, is not a mid-market deal because it's part of Brinker, which has considerably more units. I have seen this burn plenty of companies who didn't recognize that they had Brinker assigned with quota given to an enterprise rep while simultaneously assigning out Maggiano's to an emerging team. This is a costly mistake. Please make sure this attribute is on your radar and built into how you process industry data. Okay, ownership exists. Now our 5th attribute, territory. Over the years, we've recognized that it takes a 2-tier approach to assign a territory. Most companies want to simply talk about where a brand's headquarters is, but that attribute is only applicable to the relatively few multi-unit concepts that have like 20 or 30 locations. And by the way, some with over 30 locations don't even have a headquarters, or at least don't have one that you can find at scale. So let's agree that for the top side of the industry, headquarters works. But for the long tail, that is the part of the industry with less than 5 units, it breaks down fast. This is where I turn to something that we at Restaurantology called inferred trading area, which is scalable all the way through the remainder of the industry's long tail. Now, when we talk about calculating an inferred trading area, we're talking about using calculations based on the concept's units zip codes, which allows you to quickly group associated units by prevalent state or, going a level deeper, prevalent urban area, meaning a metroplex like DFW or Houston. This is huge because it means you can look at thousands and thousands of 2-unit concepts and immediately flip them into North and South Texas without having to research them individually. Lastly, there's one other attribute related to territory that could be relevant to your business, something we call points of interest. Perhaps your product sells well, or I guess it could sell poorly, when locations are on a campus or in an airport. Again, these can be calculated using zip codes for restaurants of any size, so you can safely include them in your internal glossary. For our 6th and final firmographic attribute, let's talk about hypothesized lifecycle. There are 2 different ways you can insinuate where a multi-unit brand may be in their lifecycle. One, which we mentioned earlier, which is offering. Nashville hot chicken has been trending hard for the past year. Knowing this means you could reasonably assume that any concepts with hot chicken in their name have a pretty good chance to expand in the foreseeable future based on industry market conditions. Korean corn dogs are another good example of this. You may have seen trending items like this in the past with bubble tea and poke, which were both rapidly expanding but have since cooled off in terms of where they are in their life cycle. The second, in my opinion, stronger way to calculate where a brand is in its life cycle is to simply use change in units over time. How many stores are they opening? How many stores are they closing? And how can openings and closures help me understand quickly where to focus my sales and marketing muscles? Internally, we call the ability to look at openings and closures at scale across the entirety of the industry inferred status. It's pretty powerful and helps individuals and teams align talk tracks and products based on what might be the most relevant to that specific company, knowing they might be expanding or contracting their footprint at any given moment in time. Okay, so before moving to our final attribute, here's a quick recap of our firmographic insights. Size, which is unit count and segment. Offering, what's on the menu. Service type, FSR, LSR, or buffet. Ownership, is this part of something bigger? Territory, can I infer their trading area? And life cycle, are they growing, stable, or declining? You're going to hear me talk about these a ton, especially when we get to segmentation. Now that we're on the same page in terms of the 6 firmographic attributes you can use when defining the restaurant industry, there's just one more to add to complete our list. Attribute number 7, tech stack, or what we like to call technographics. There is a ton of information that you can derive from a restaurant's website. So much so, I wrote a blog about this a while back. And while individual reps can be trained on what to look for, they simply cannot do it fast enough to cover the breadth of the industry and cannot confirm their findings frequently enough for you to feel confident about it any number of months later. And even if you train your employees on what to look for, using human beings as tech stack detectives does not scale. If you're curious about just what kinds of things you can learn from a website, here's a list of software categories where you can detect hundreds of different providers. Again, feel free to pause here to learn more. Knowing a restaurant's tech stack can be monumental in terms of prioritizing certain deals. Whether it's directly relevant or not, most companies want to know what point of sale a restaurant is running, not just because there might be a dependent integration, but because knowing if a restaurant is running Toast or Micros is basically the equivalent of knowing if your best friend has an iPhone or an Android. Or I guess in this instance, it would be more like knowing if they have an iPhone or a BlackBerry. For a quick frame of reference, there are currently over 12,000 multi-unit websites in the US and Canada, and there is a 25% chance that we can directly detect a point of sale by visiting their website. And that number is growing. Before we close off on technographics, a few final thoughts. Not all tech stack details can be verified by visiting a restaurant's website. I'm not claiming that 100% can. Inventory provider is something that you simply cannot get a read on across the industry. You'll want to continue to use your discovery process for anything that's vital to your business that cannot be detected using at-scale market intelligence via automated data validation. That said, there are still well over 350 industry-specific software that can be uniquely and repeatedly detected, which have two primary benefits for your business. Number one, you can directly detect a large portion of their tech stack, something that most companies seem to want to do. And number two, you can understand their overall approach to adopting technology, which can teach you what to expense once you begin prospecting. To wrap up today's Speak the Market video, I'll leave you with this. How we talk about things is important, and making sure everyone talks about the industry the same way is paramount. Whether you choose to adopt these industry definitions as is, or whether you plan to put your business's unique thumbprint on them, what's most important is that you recognize that these definitions are for individuals from the bottom of the organization all the way to the top. All teams, all times, no exception. Then, with this glossary of key terms built and internally accepted, we can head on to step 2, finding our industry TAM, which will be the topic for our next video. Ciao for now.